Hawkins, Indiana seemed peaceful that Tuesday. The sun cast these long, lazy shadows across the quiet streets as evening approached. Kids rode their bikes home from school, and their laughter echoed in the cooling air. Lawn sprinklers hissed, throwing rainbows in the golden light. From the outside, it was just another day in a small American town. No one knew the darkness that was stirring just beneath the surface. It was a silent, creeping thing, like mold growing in the dark, unseen and unnoticed until it was too late. The town was holding its breath, waiting for a storm that no one saw coming. Everything felt normal, but it was a fragile kind of normal. At the grocery store, people pushed their carts and talked about the weather. At the gas station, the attendant complained about the price of fuel. In our homes, families gathered for dinner. The clatter of forks and knives, a familiar, comforting sound. Yet, there was this subtle wrongness in the air. A feeling you couldn't quite put your finger on. It was like watching a movie you'd seen before, but some of the details were slightly off. The shadows seemed a little too long, the quiet a little too deep. The streetlights flickered to life one by one, their orange glow painting the town in a hazy light. But some of them buzzed erratically, stuttering on and off as if they were struggling to stay lit. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, a sharp, frantic sound that was quickly swallowed by the silence. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, pressing down on you. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping town. It was the tense, waiting quiet of something holding its breath, anticipating a scream that was about to be torn from its throat. Down in my basement, I tinkered with my old radio, trying to find a clear station. The usual rock anthems were lost in a sea of static. I didn't think much of it at the time. Bad reception was a common thing in Hawkins, but looking back, I realize it was the first sign. The world we knew was already starting to fray at the edges, the signals from our reality getting lost in the noise of something else. Something ancient and hungry, waking up from a long, dark sleep just beneath our feet. The static was the first to speak. It wasn't just random noise anymore. It was a language of its own, full of hisses and crackles that seemed to whisper just out of reach of understanding. I twisted the dial on my radio, trying to tune it out, but the static followed me across the frequencies. It was on every station, a persistent gnawing sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The air in the basement suddenly felt colder, heavier. It was as if the static was alive, a malevolent presence seeping through the speakers and into the room. Then, a voice cut through the noise. It was small, a child's voice, filled with a desperate, chilling fear. "It's coming," the voice whispered, distorted and broken by the static. "Don't let it see you, United States, it's coming for everyone." The words were faint, almost lost in the electronic snow, but they were clear enough to freeze the blood in my veins. My hand trembled as I reached for the volume, turning it up, but the voice was gone. Only the hungry static remained, louder now, angrier. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. This wasn't a prank. I tried to call Dustin, my fingers fumbling with the rotary dial of the phone. The line was dead. Just a hollow, empty hum. Panic began to claw at my throat. I tried Lucas's number, then Max's. Nothing. It was like the whole town had been cut off from the outside world. The whispers from the radio echoed in my head, the child's warning replaying over and over. "It's coming for everyone." The words felt like a prophecy, a dark promise hanging in the air. The feeling of isolation was absolute. We were alone. The static wasn't just on my radio. It was everywhere. It came from the television, which now showed only a swirling gray screen. It came from the walkie-talkies we had used since we were kids, our only reliable connection to each other. Now, they too were filled with the same hissing darkness, occasionally punctuated by that same terrified, whispering voice. It was a warning, a desperate plea from somewhere beyond the veil. A warning that Hawkins was no longer safe, that a predator was stalking our streets, and we were its unsuspecting prey. The next morning, the silence was deafening. The usual sounds of a waking town were gone. There were no cars heading to work, No school buses rumbling down the street, no distant sound of the mill. My own house was eerily quiet. My parents' bedroom door was open, the bed neatly made, but they were gone. A half-eaten breakfast sat on the kitchen table, a glass of orange juice sweating onto the wood. Their car was still in the driveway. It was as if they had simply evaporated into thin air, leaving behind only the ghostly echoes of their morning routine. I grabbed my bike and rode into town, my heart pounding against my ribs. The streets were deserted, cars were parked haphazardly, some with their doors still open, keys dangling from the ignition. In front of the grocery store, a shopping cart lay on its side, its contents of apples and cereal spilled across the pavement. Inside, the lights flickered over aisles that were completely empty of people. It was a ghost town, a perfect snapshot of life interrupted in a single, horrifying moment. The entire population of Hawkins had vanished overnight. Every house I passed told the same story. Lights were left on, televisions blared to empty rooms, and meals grew cold on dining tables. It was as if people had been plucked from their lives mid-sentence, mid-bite, mid-step. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no forced entries. Just an unsettling emptiness, a profound and absolute absence. The town felt like a museum of a lost civilization, each home a perfectly preserved exhibit of a life that was suddenly, inexplicably over. The quiet was no longer just quiet, it was a hungry void. The air grew heavy with a strange metallic smell, like ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with something damp and earthy, like a freshly dug grave. The flickering lights became more frantic, buzzing like angry insects. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck that refused to go away. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we weren't alone. The people were gone, but something else had taken their place. Something was hiding in the shadows of our empty homes, watching and waiting. I found Dustin first. He was huddled over his superpowered radio, Cerebro, his face pale in the glow of the equipment. He'd heard the voice too, the same child's whisper cutting through the static. We didn't need to say much. The fear in his eyes mirrored my own. We found Lucas next, pacing his front yard with a slingshot in his hand, his wrist rocket ready for a fight he didn't understand. Then came Max, a fierce determination set on her face, her skateboard clutched like a weapon. We were scared, but we were together. That was all that mattered. 11 was the last one we found. She was sitting on the porch swing of Hopper's old cabin, staring into the woods with an unnerving stillness. She had felt it before any of us. A tremor in the fabric of reality that she knew all too well. When she saw us, a flicker of relief crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by a deep sadness. She knew what this was. She had seen the darkness before, had fought it, had bled for it, and now it was back, stronger than ever. The party was reunited, not for a D&D campaign, but for a war we didn't know if we could win. We gathered in my basement, the place where it all began. The old D&D map was still on the table, a relic from a more innocent time. We tried to piece together what was happening, the static, the voice, the empty town. It all pointed to one thing, a place we had tried so desperately to forget. The Upside Down. It wasn't just a gate anymore. It wasn't a monster hunting in the shadows. This was different. This was an invasion. The entire town was under siege by a silent, invisible enemy. Our fear was a tangible thing, a cold presence in the room. But our friendship was stronger. We had faced monsters before. We had stood together against the darkness and won. We armed ourselves with what we had. Dustin's radio, Lucas's slingshot, my walkie-talkie, and 11's power. It wasn't much against an enemy that could make an entire town disappear, but it was all we had. We were the only ones left, the only ones who knew the truth. The fate of Hawkins, and maybe the world, rested on our shoulders. The sky was the next thing to break. The calm blue expanse of the afternoon began to curdle, turning a sickly shade of gray-green. Then, without warning, the storm broke. But this was no ordinary thunderstorm. The clouds roiled and churned with an unnatural violent energy. Lightning spiderwebbed across the sky, not in flashes of white or blue, but in a terrifying blood-red color. Each bolt struck with a deafening crack that shook the very ground beneath our feet, making the windows of my house rattle in their frames. We watched from the basement window as the crimson lightning began to strike the town. It didn't hit randomly. It seemed to have a purpose. One bolt struck a power transformer down the street, causing it to explode in a shower of sparks and a cloud of black smoke. Another hit the antenna on the roof of the radio station, silencing the static for a moment before it returned, angrier than before. The storm was dismantling our town piece by piece, cutting off our connections, isolating us even further. It felt like an attack, a strategic bombardment from another world. The rain started then, a cold, oily downpour that slicked the streets and blurred the world outside. The sky overhead glowed a constant, menacing red, casting the empty town in a hellish light. The storm was alive. We could feel its rage, its hatred. It wasn't just weather, it was a weapon. It was the upside down bleeding through, its toxic atmosphere poisoning our world. We knew we couldn't stay hidden in the basement forever. We had to move, to find answers, before the storm tore Hawkins apart completely. The decision was made. We had to get to the woods, to the source. The weird signals, the strange energy fluctuations Dustin was tracking on his makeshift equipment, all pointed to one area, Mirkwood. Riding our bikes through the storm was a nightmare. The red lightning lit up the sky, revealing twisted, monstrous shapes in the churning clouds. The wind howled like a tortured animal, trying to rip us from our bikes. The world felt like it was ending, and we were riding straight into the heart of the apocalypse. Deep in the foggy woods, where the trees grew thick and gnarled, we found it. A small, dilapidated cabin that wasn't on any map. It looked ancient, its wood rotted and covered in a strange black moss that seemed to pulse with a faint light. The air around it was freezing cold, and a low, humming sound vibrated through the soles of our shoes. This was the source of the energy readings, the epicenter of the wrongness that had consumed our town. With a shared look of trepidation, we pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The interior was even more unsettling. The cabin was a single dusty room, but every inch of the walls was covered in drawings. They were children's drawings, crude and simple, done in crayon and charcoal. But they weren't pictures of houses or sunshine. They were pictures of monsters, tall, faceless creatures with long, spindly limbs, vicious, dog-like beasts with mouths full of needle-sharp teeth. And in the center of it all, a giant spider-like shadow that loomed over everything. Beneath the drawings were frantic, scrawled warnings. Don't make a sound. It sees you. Run. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what we were looking at. These weren't just drawings. They were a record, a history of fear. Other children had been here before. Other children had seen these things. As we stood there, frozen in horror, a sound broke the silence. A rhythmic, wet tearing sound. It was coming from the corner of the cabin, from a dark shape huddled on the floor. It was a deer, or what was left of one. Its chest was ripped open, and a creature was feasting on it. It was one of the monsters from the drawings, a demogorgon. Its head unfolded like a grotesque flower, revealing rows of sharp teeth. It let out a piercing shriek that rattled our bones and lunged toward us. We scrambled back, screaming, tripping over each other in our haste to escape. Lucas fired a rock from his slingshot, hitting it in the side, but it barely flinched. Eleven raised her hand, her nose bleeding, and with a powerful scream, she slammed the cabin door shut just as the creature lunged, its claws scraping against the wood. We had found our answer, and it was more terrifying than we could have ever imagined. The escape from the cabin was just the beginning. The town we returned to was not the same one we had left. The upside down was no longer just bleeding through, it was pouring in, transforming our world into a mirror of its own twisted reality. The sky was now a permanent stormy red, a gaping wound in the heavens. and the vines were everywhere. Thick, black, pulsating vines snaked their way across the streets, up the sides of buildings, and through the windows of our homes. They were like the veins of some colossal, unseen beast, pumping its dark lifeblood into the heart of Hawkins. The change wasn't just physical, the very air had changed. It was thick and heavy, filled with floating white spores that looked like ash from a never-ending fire. The smell of decay and ozone was overpowering, and the people, some of them were back. We saw them through the windows, standing perfectly still in their living rooms, their faces blank, their eyes vacant. Mrs. Wheeler stood in her kitchen, staring at the wall, her hand frozen above the stove. They were like puppets whose strings had been cut, their minds captured by whatever had taken them. We saw monsters roaming the streets openly now. Demodogs, smaller and faster than the Demogorgon, hunted in packs, their screeches echoing through the deserted town. They skittered through the shadows, their claws clicking on the pavement, drawn to any sound or movement. We hid in an alleyway, our hearts pounding, as a pack of them tore apart a car, ripping through the metal with terrifying ease. The line between our world and the Upside Down had been erased. We were living in a nightmare, and the monsters were real. The clock tower at the center of town, which had been silent for years, suddenly began to chime. Its bell rang with a deep, discordant tone that resonated through the entire town. But it didn't stop at 12. It kept going. We counted each toll, our dread growing with every number. 13. The clock tower rang 13 times, a final definitive proclamation that the rules of our world no longer applied. Time itself was broken. The town of Hawkins was now fully and truly a part of the Upside Down. The 13th chime of the clock tower was a death knell. As the final dissonant echo faded, the ground beneath our feet began to tremble violently. It wasn't an earthquake, it was something worse. The very fabric of reality was tearing apart. We watched in horror as a massive fissure opened up in the middle of Main Street, splitting the asphalt and swallowing the town library in a cloud of dust and debris. 4 more fissures opened in perfect sync, racing out from the center of town like the spokes of a wheel, glowing with a malevolent red energy. Hawkins was literally being ripped open. The Upside Down wasn't just invading anymore, it was merging, consuming. Buildings tilted at impossible angles, their foundations crumbling as the ground shifted. Trees from the Upside Down, twisted and black, erupted from the earth, their branches clawing at the red sky. The air crackled with energy, and the screams of unseen things filled the night. It was a symphony of destruction, a beautiful and terrifying apocalypse unfolding before our very eyes. We were standing on the edge of 2 worlds colliding. From the central fissure, where the library used to be, something began to rise. It was a shadow, a formless, colossal shape made of smoke and lightning. It grew and grew, blotting out the red sky until it towered over what was left of our town. Its shape was familiar, a nightmarish echo of the drawings in the cabin, the spider-like form that haunted Will's visions, the Mind Flayer. But it was larger, more powerful than anything we had ever seen. It was no longer just a shadow in the sky. It was here, in our world. Its immense presence, a physical weight pressing down on us. The giant shadow let out a psychic roar, a silent scream that tore through our minds, filling our heads with images of death and decay. The entranced townspeople de Bois, who had been standing like statues, all turned in unison, their heads snapping toward the rising monster. Their mouths opened and they let out a single unified scream, a sound that was both human and monstrous. They were its army, its puppets. The Mind Flayer had not just taken our town, it had taken our friends, our families, and now it was turning them against us. We knew we couldn't run. There was nowhere left to run to. This was it. This was our home, and we were not going to let it fall without a fight. With a renewed, desperate courage, we charged into the chaos. Lucas loaded his slingshot with scavenged ball bearings, firing them at the swarming demodogs. Dustin, screaming insults, used his can of Farrah Fawcett hairspray and a lighter to create a makeshift flamethrower, holding the smaller creatures at bay. Max used her skateboard as a shield and a weapon, a blur of motion in the swirling ash. I did what I could, using a discarded piece of rebar as a crude spear, fighting alongside my friends, a terrified but determined soldier in a war I never asked for. But our real hope, our only hope, was 11. She stood in the center of the chaos, her face a mask of concentration, blood pouring from her nose. She raised her hands, and the ground around her cracked. Cars and debris lifted into the air, swirling around her like a shield. She was a hurricane of power, a small girl holding back the apocalypse. She was magnificent. The battle raged. We were pushed back, again and again. The monsters were endless, a tide of claws and teeth. The entranced townspeople advanced, their eyes glowing with a faint red light, their movements jerky and unnatural. We were almost overwhelmed, cornered in the ruins of the town square. The giant shadow of the mind flayer loomed over us, its psychic pressure threatening to crush our minds. It felt like the end. We were just kids, fighting a god in the ruins of our world. Then, in the final moment, as a wave of demodogs lunged for us, 11 let out a final, earth-shattering scream. A wave of pure telekinetic energy erupted from her, a blinding white light that vaporized the monsters, shattered the ground, and pushed back the darkness. The giant shadow in the sky recoiled, shrieking in pain, and then everything went white. When I awoke, I was lying on cold, damp soil. My friends were scattered around me, unconscious but alive. But Hawkins was gone. There was no town, no ruins, no fissure, just an endless dark forest under a permanent blood-red sky. The Upside Down had won. It had taken our home. And from the darkness ahead, something ancient, something far older than the Mind Flayer, stirred and opened its eyes.